Welcome to the first episode of Undoctrinated. Today, we're just going to start off the podcast with a simple question. Who occupies the highest office in government in the United States? Most people answer that question without even thinking about it. They'll say, it's the president. Obviously, it's got to be. Or maybe they'll say, it's the executive branch. And if one of those things is something that came to mind for you, I want you to hear this clearly up front. You're not stupid. You were just never taught basic American civics. Most Americans have strong opinions about politics, but almost no understanding of how their government is actually structured. We've been trained to look at the presidency as the most powerful office and the final authority, but that picture is completely wrong. And when we start with the wrong picture, everything downstream gets distorted. Here's the truth that almost no one talks about. The President of the United States of America has very limited power, far less than you've been led to believe by social media, your favorite political influencers, or the public education system. Here's the thing. Executive orders can be reversed, policies can be undone, and agendas can disappear overnight, which is why every 4 years it feels like the entire country is holding its breath. It's suffocating to think that everything depends on one election or one single person. And even when a president does do things that you like, maybe even things that genuinely improve your life, none of it is permanent. The next administration can and will come in and wipe it all away. That's politics. Take Trump as an example. I personally used to be a Republican and a big fan of what the Republican Party was doing and of what Trump was doing. But I'm simply not anymore because I can see how both parties are incredibly corrupt, and I don't want to associate myself with either party anymore. But anyways, using Trump as an example, he made real changes during his first term in office, but like most presidents, many of those changes were later undone by his successor, by Joe Biden. Executive power was designed to be reversible by the founding fathers who rejected monarchy. So I think that's where the frustration really sets in for a lot of people because what we're really experiencing isn't progress. It's like a pendulum. One party pushes in one direction and the other party swings it back over and over and over again. Meanwhile, the people stay stuck in the same place, convinced that we're making a difference by voting harder every 4 years. And that's the exhausting part. You're told that if you just show up, just vote, just campaign harder, or just post more online, then things will change. But they don't, at least not in any lasting way. We've been running the same experiment for decades. One administration signs executive orders, the next wipes them away. One agenda replaces another, and nothing fundamentally changes. There's a quote that gets attributed to Albert Einstein. He never actually said this, but it still holds true. And the quote is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
That's exactly what this feels like. Insanity dressed up as civic duty. To my understanding, the question that few are willing to ask is, what if the real answer isn't in the next election? That's far too easy. What if it's something greater, something written into the system from the beginning that modern Americans have completely and utterly forgotten? So let's go back to the original question. Who occupies the highest office in American government? The answer definitely isn't the president, it isn't Congress, and it sure ain't the Supreme Court. It's you. And that's usually the moment people get confused because we're not used to hearing that. But it's true. We, the people, are the sovereign authority in this republic. If you're a U.S. citizen over the age of 18, you are part of the collective sovereign. Not individually, collectively. And that distinction matters a lot. This has nothing to do with sovereign citizen nonsense. That idea is anarchy, everyone acting as their own authority. That's not what this is. We, the people, are the sovereign together. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the very first words in the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution. That's not poetic. That's legal authority. It means the people are the authors of the highest law in the land, which flips the whole way we think about power. The Constitution doesn't give us rights. It recognizes the authority we already possess. It doesn't create power, it limits power. Specifically, it limits government power. And it places the people above every public servant in this republic. So then the question becomes, why don't we act like it? Why have we handed over our authority and duty to career politicians and unelected bureaucrats who treat us like peasants, worse than peasants, instead of the collective sovereign? Why weren't we taught this in school? Why can so many people explain gender theory better than the Bill of Rights and have never even heard the phrase constitutional republic? And I know that ignorance is so far from harmless.
Exactly. A country of ignorant people can do far more damage than a country of bad people. When people lose the ability to think deeply, they become easy to manipulate and entertain, and in turn, easy to control. And that's not entirely your fault, but it is your responsibility now that you know. So, like you were saying, and along those lines, once we start asking that question, if we the people are truly the highest office in this republic, if all lawful authority actually flows from the people downwards, then why don't we live like that's true? It forces us to admit that something went wrong long before the last election, or the last president, or even the last generation. This isn't a recent failure, it's a slow one. And slow failures are harder to see, which is why they're more dangerous. One of the most common reactions people have when they hear these basic civics lessons for the first time is disbelief. They'll ask, why was I never taught this in school? And that's a fair question. Civics is not a niche subject. It's not optional knowledge. It's the operating system of our republic. And yet, most Americans graduate knowing almost nothing about sovereignty, jurisdiction, or the actual structure of lawful authority. They can explain complex social theories, repeat political slogans, and argue endlessly about elections, but they've never been taught the difference between a democracy and a constitutional republic, or what it actually means for government to be limited by law. I think part of that omission is intentional. Whether people want to admit it or not, a population that understands its authority is harder to manage and harder to manipulate. When people don't know where power comes from, they'll accept it from whoever claims it most confidently. And that's what's happening right now in our country.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening right now. And over time, that creates this culture where the government feels like something external and imposed, rather than something that derives from the people, from us, ourselves. You start to see citizens as subjects and politics as some spectacle, a show, instead of civic responsibility. When people don't understand law, structure, or authority, they respond emotionally instead of rationally. They make decisions based on fear, outrage, or this sick tribal loyalty instead of pure principle. And that's not just because they're stupid, it's because they've never been trained to think deeply about serious things. As we were saying earlier, a country of ignorant people can do far more harm than a country of bad people. Bad people are usually visible or obvious. You can identify them, oppose them, and remove them. Ignorance is a lot different. It hides behind good intentions and wokeness, and it feels really polite. It doesn't look threatening, but ignorance produces vulnerability. And vulnerable people are easy to lead wherever someone else wants them to go, which is why these emotional identity politics work so well. If people don't understand how power actually works, then whoever can control the narrative, the emotional narrative, effectively controls the entire conversation and the people partaking in the conversation.
Yeah, that actually leads directly into something that I believe most people have already realized about modern life, and that is that we've lost the ability to focus as a generation. Based on the statistics, at least, the average human attention span today is around 8 seconds. That is a measurable reality shaped by the way we consume information. Short form videos, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, endless scrolling, constant novelty, none of that trains you to think carefully, slowly, or deeply. It just trains you to react, and reacting is very different from reasoning. In The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, he points out that a goldfish has a longer attention span than the average American, 9 seconds. That's one whole second longer than us. We are being beaten by a fish in our attention span. And that's honestly pretty funny to me, but it's also deeply troubling because serious subjects like law, theology, philosophy, those demand sustained attention. When our attention span disappears, depth completely disappears with it. And when depth is gone, people become, as we've been talking about, easier to entertain and easier to manipulate. not because they're malicious or foolish, but because they're constantly distracted. And distraction feels harmless right now to a lot of people. It doesn't look like tyranny, it looks like comfort. And here's an important clarification. A lot of this conditioning, it wasn't chosen. Most of us were raised in it. The media environment, the education system, the pace of life, we inherited all of that. But once you see it, responsibility has to kick in. You don't get to unknow all of this. And at that point, it stops becoming about blame and starts becoming about duty. And this podcast isn't about politics in the modern sense. We're not affiliated with either political party, and we're not trying to convince you to vote for the GOP or anything like that. We're not about parties or elections or personalities. We are simply about what is grounded in reality. We want to teach people, especially people in our generation, about American civics. And we're about reclaiming something that was always supposed to belong to the people.
You said it. And that responsibility that we'll be teaching you can feel really, really heavy at first, especially if you spent most of your life being told that your role is to just sit back and vote and relax. Everybody else has it. One of the biggest lies people internalize is that they're too small to matter or that they were born at the wrong time to make that difference. But that's not reality. You could have been born in any other era under any other system, and you weren't. You were born here in this republic during one of the most consequential periods in its history, perhaps world history. Feeling powerless doesn't mean you are powerless. It means you've been conditioned to believe that authority belongs somewhere else. Once you free yourself from that twisted illusion, everything changes. You stop looking upward to politicians and you start looking outward to your neighbors, your community, your county. That's where lawful solutions actually begin, right outside your front door.
That's a great point. And before we close, there's one habit that we want to set early on because it's going to matter for everything that follows. Anytime we're dealing with serious subjects or less serious subjects, but especially the serious ones like law, government, Christianity, philosophy, you have to define your terms. Words matter. And so the question you should get comfortable asking over and over again is, what do you mean by that? That question comes from Greg Kokel's book, Tactics, and it's powerful because it forces clarity. Knowing what someone means by a word can completely change the meaning of that argument. And that applies here too. We're going to keep defining our terms as we go because clarity is the enemy of manipulation. And once you know what words like authority, sovereignty, and law actually mean, you can't unknow it, which means you're responsible for what you do with that knowledge.
Could not have said that better myself. And another thing is responsibility presupposes authority. If we, the people, are truly sovereign, then the identifiers we use matter, both the title we claim as a collective sovereign and the symbols by which that authority is recognized. Historically, seals have represented authority, jurisdiction, and identity. Governments didn't use the seals simply as decoration, they used them as declarations. A seal tells you who is acting and under what authority. That's why Tactical Civics has a great seal, not as branding fluff, not as a logo, but as a statement. It represents law and foundational authority, not activism or politics. It's a reminder of where sovereignty actually resides. The Great Seal exists to communicate that this work is grounded in constitutional authority exercised by we the people, not by personalities, parties, or institutions that have drifted so far from their purpose. And everything we're going to talk about going forward flows from that idea. Inside the seal, you'll notice the familiar and iconic American eagle. That's an intentional return to America's founding structure. The olive branch and the arrows represent peace and force, both under lawful control, not chaos and not mob rule. Law, something we desperately need to return to in this country. Above the eagle is E pluribus unum, out of many, one. That's the collective sovereign again. Many people, one authority, acting together. And then there's the phrase at the bottom, non imperat nobis DC, which is Latin and means Washington, D.C. does not rule over us. That's not anti government rhetoric, it's constitutional reality. Government is the servant, the people are the masters. When that order flips, liberty completely collapses in on itself. And here's the most important part of all, This seal does not belong to an organization. It belongs to the people. If you step into this mission, if you accept the responsibility that comes with being part of the collective sovereign, then this is your seal of office. It represents your lawful authority, your duty, your inheritance as an American citizen. Everything we're going to talk about from here on out, grand juries, law, enforcement, accountability, only makes sense if this foundation is true. Because the people are the highest office, this seal is simply a visual reminder of that authority. And the real question moving forward isn't whether the system is broken, it's whether the people are willing to act like the sovereign they already are.
Yeah, and there's one more detail as well about the seal that most people don't know, but it really matters a lot, and that's that the Great Seal of the United States is actually legally reserved for government use only. It's not something that private citizens are allowed to just slap on products, websites, or merchandise, which does make sense because the seal represents authority. But here's where things get really interesting. If the seal is reserved for government use only, and if we the people are the highest office in this republic, then what does that tell you? Tactical Civics has been using the seal for years now, and we have never been taken down or arrested for using our seal, the people's seal. So, if the premise is true, if the people are the highest office, then the real question becomes, what are we supposed to do with that authority? And that's where we're going to be headed next in the future episodes. That'll do for the episode today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we look forward to unpacking a lot more complex topics and going a lot more in depth in everything that we covered today. We will see you guys next week.